Welcome back. We have got a lot on our plate this morning to talk about with our roundtable. And as always, we've got a great one for you. We want to welcome back Mark Caputo, who was covering the 2020 presidential race for Politico with a special emphasis on Florida. Ed Fazuli is president of the Tripp Scott Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale and an influential voice in Republican Party politics. Stephen Johnson, an attorney in Miami with the Lydecker Diaz firm. He chairs Miami-Dade County's Black Affairs Advisory Board. Good morning, gentlemen. Boy, we don't have any female representation, but we will move on nevertheless. Steve Johnson, let me ask you, let's begin with the story du jour, which is the kind of shocking Epstein death, suicide in New York. And as I said to the congressman earlier, how could somebody in a really maximum security federal prison kill himself who is in a special housing unit under surveillance on TV?
It was shocking, and in fact a group of friends and I were going through it together, and the one thing everyone came down to was, well, I wonder who else had something to do with it. And that's kind of been the narrative thus far, and I don't know that anyone's had anything else to do with it. I do know this. Some people are going to have to answer some questions, because from what I understand, they do a bed check. There's a 3-hour interval between the bed checks, and this gentleman tried to do it already. The saddest thing is there are a lot of people who deserve answers that are not going to get them because conveniently he's gone.
That is the tragedy, that dozens of young women who have filed complaints, who are part of the lawsuit, who wanted to go to court, wanted to see him eye to eye and confront him with the pain he had caused. Now they don't have that chance.
They're probably not going to get that vindication in a certain sense because they've been pursuing this for several years. The bigger issue is that we also saw a 2,000-page dump on Friday, right, of all of the background around the Epstein matter, and that'll be very interesting as that kind of folds out over the next couple of weeks. But I don't think anybody's crying for the death of Jeffrey Epstein.
I'm certainly not. Mark, some of those prominent names mentioned in that Friday dump from that lawsuit that had been sealed, and then thanks to the Miami Herald and other media was unsealed. There's some prominent people who've got to be uncomfortable.
Well, uncomfortable, yes, but the lead witness potentially is dead.
Yeah.
So I don't know how uncomfortable they are now. And in today's media world and in today's social media world, stories only stay alive for so long, and the main character keeping that story alive is dead.
The protagonist is dead.
Or antagonist, I don't know what he would be. I guess protagonist of the story, but certainly antagonist as far as his
Those
victims
women
are concerned.
Yeah, right. Well, I'm going to do a little commentary at the end of the show about that. But for now, let's move on and talk about this extraordinary weekend where the nation is in mourning. The 31 citizens and a couple of Mexicans who were in El Paso are being buried now, and now the conversation has turned to gun reform, if legislation, and the president on Friday, as you know, kind of said, yeah, I'm ready to support universal background checks, but I've got to check with the NRA.
Well, he didn't quite say that. He said that the NRA shouldn't be much of a problem. We'll see how much of a problem they will be. But one of the things I think that we should also understand, that they talk about these red flag laws.
Yeah.
We actually have them in Florida, and they've worked. Since 2018, they were put in place by the Florida legislature. Some 2,400 people were impacted by these red flag laws, identified, and about 600 of them were gun owners who lost their license because a judge determined, based upon what was filed, that they were not capable, mentally or otherwise, of having a gun license. So very interesting. So it is working in Florida. So some of what they're talking about on the federal side about encouraging states to create these red flag laws it isn't bad, provided, as a lawyer and somebody who's interested in individual rights, provided we protect due process of those involved.
Senator Rubio's carrying that bill, actually.
Yes,
He did issue a statement saying he'll go back to Washington instantly to go pass it if the Senate comes back in session, which means he's not going back to Washington instantly because the Senate's not coming back in session, because McConnell right now has a posture of really not passing much of anything.
And just to tag on individual rights, the Attorney General came out against the effort to have an amendment placed on the Florida Constitution.
The Florida Attorney General, Ashley Moody.
That's correct.
Right.
To allow us the opportunity to vote on whether or not, as Floridians, we're ready to take some steps in the wake of the Pulse nightclub shooting and in the wake of what happened at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. To deprive us the opportunity, she's actually opposing the language. She says that, oh, it's going to take away your right to own your grandfather's gun. But to deprive us the opportunity to actually sit there and vote and consider whether we as a people want to ban these weapons, that's wrong.
So let me ask you something. If there was an amendment put on the Florida ballot that I could no longer speak on behalf of conservative causes because that you wanted to impinge upon my free speech, my political speech, that would be okay for people to vote on and to limit that right of mine? So I got to tell you, the idea of a majority, there are certain things that should not be voted on. There are inalienable rights, and some of those come right out of the Constitution about,
Assault weapons are not
No, wait. Right to
Let's
bear
be
arms,
honest.
right to free speech. We see that in some of the stories we saw this week.
If you want a
with
musket,
Joaquin
you can have
Castro
it.
as an example, putting out a list of people who are Trump supporters. And why did he do it? Well, they should think twice about that.
We'll get to
That's
Joaquin.
impinging upon somebody's individual rights. That's the
Listen,
danger here.
high-capacity magazines is not an individual right. It's a danger
Not
to the rest of
protected
us.
by the Second Amendment
It's a danger
either.
to all of us.
Yeah. All right. Hold your thoughts, everybody. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with more Roundtable in just a minute. Glad to have you with us on this Sunday. We are with Ed Pizzoli and Mark Caputo and Stephen Johnson talking at the moment about guns. And Stephen, you had mentioned Ashley Moody, the Florida Attorney General, and the question, just so if anybody at home doesn't quite get it, and Ed, Counselor, correct me if I'm wrong, but the group Ban Assault Weapons Now, BAWN, has a campaign going to put on the 2020 election ballot a question that would ban assault rifles, and we want to put their definition of an assault rifle on the screen. Any semi-automatic rifle or shotgun capable of holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition at once, either in a fixed or detachable magazine or any other ammunition feeding device. And Mark Caputo, you had said during the break that the objections from the Attorney General are correct. It's a very general definition, would cover a wide spectrum of long guns.
Right. Well, I wasn't siding with her or siding against her as whether it was correct or not, but it is a very broad definition. It's not quite, but you could see where this would ban almost any sort of tactical rifle or any sort of rifle outside of a bolt action. Now, that there are rifles that have built-in magazines that can limit them, but again, the definition here says any rifle that can handle this sort of ammunition. So it could be a very broad thing, and Moody is saying it's too broad. Now, that having been said, she clearly is a pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment conservative who's in the Attorney General's office, and she's going to get flack for this.
So the basic question still is, are any of these, if you, whatever ban you want to put on assault weapons, does that solve the problem? Does it prevent what you're looking to prevent? So the real question is, does this legislation that they're proposing around this prevent these tragedies from occurring? And the answer is mostly no.
Absolutely.
Well, we don't
Wait,
really
that's
know.
actually not even accurate. So the Dayton shooter had 30 seconds. He had a 100-round magazine. He was able to do all that carnage in 30 seconds before he was taken down. If, on the other hand, he had a bolt action, right? You'd still have carnage, but on a different level. So the question isn't whether or not it's too broad. The question is whether or not we as Floridians deserve to answer that question. Because me, for one, I'm going to say, absolutely, let's put a limit on it. Let's have it. If you want to have the gun like the guy in the movie, the TV show The Rifleman, from the old Western style.
30-30.
If you want to have a 30-30, that's fine. If you want to go shoot buck or feral pigs, that's fine. If you want to shoot each other or shoot at me, that's
Has
not
it
fine.
worked? My point is, has the assault weapon ban worked in California? They've still had several shootings out there.
Well, the Gilroy, California shooter bought his gun in Nevada and then drove to Gilroy.
Again, did it stop? The answer
Well,
is
then if
no.
you have a checkerboard kind of legal system on these guns, you need a federal a nationwide system.
We can do what we can do here on the state level, and actually,
And we have on the red flag, Steve. We have.
Well,
but
and
we're
on
not
age,
done.
we expanded the age to
We have.
21 from 18.
and it took a brutal massacre at a high school to do that. Keep in mind that all these laws are reactions to things that are tragedies. Ashley Moody put on her Twitter she was horrified and saddened, right? Well, let's take that horrified and saddened presence and make it into action. Let us take an opportunity to put some common sense laws on the books, and if the legislature won't do it, then you're right. It needs to be the people of the state of Florida.
All right, I want to kind of move to a comment about guns that you heard this week. National Association of Black Journalists, among the people who was there was Senator Cory Booker, who's been quite outspoken on the subject of guns and what legislation is needed to improve, fewer of these mass shootings. Here's what Senator Booker had to say.
The license to drive a car, you should have a license to buy and possess a firearm. It doesn't undermine somebody's Second Amendment right to own a firearm if you're a law-abiding citizen, but it will drive down gun violence.
All right, so Mark, you were there covering that for Politico. I thought Booker was pretty effective in his arguments. He's not going to sell them, I think, in Washington, but...
Yeah, I can't comment on how effective he's going to be because he's a cellar dweller in the polls. So I'm really not sure how much longer Cory Booker is going to be around in the presidential race. I'm also a bit of a fatalist on this, is that whether or not the argument of these two guys are both right or both wrong or some combination of it, we now have so many firearms that there is a possibility we've just been checkmated into any sort of legislative solution anyway. So for instance, when you were talking about the shooter from Gilroy in California, he was able to import his firearm from Nevada. Right. There are so many guns now, and it's just kind of a
400 million in this country.
And it's a mathematical reality is that when you have a surplus of firearms and enough crazy people, and I'm talking crazy people like psychopaths and psychotics, eventually the gun is going to wind up in the hands of the psychotic or the psychopath, and people are going to die.
My only point to that is once upon a time there was a surplus of bow and arrows, and once upon a time there was a surplus of swords. Now there isn't, right? At some point...
Because we have guns.
Because we have guns, yes, but at some point the surplus itself starts to wind its way down. If we take some steps now to say, all right, everyone doesn't need everything. I'm sorry, it's just true. When the Second Amendment was enacted, it was about muskets. Now we're talking about semi-automatic, and some people want automatic weapons. Look, at some point
they were outlawed in the 1930s.
Exactly.
But the
and you can get the piece on eBay.
But the first thing, as an example, many people in this community know the first thing that a totalitarian government does is take away the guns from people.
No reasonable person is saying take away their guns.
But let me make a point about Cory Booker's piece, though.
Yeah.
There's a difference. It's a privilege to drive a car. And so
it's not in the Second Amendment. It's not in the Constitution.
It's not in the Constitution. There's a difference between a privilege and a right. You know that.
All right, that's a point well taken. All right, hold on, gentlemen. We want to come back, and one of the things we're going to talk about is Joaquin Castro releasing the names on Twitter of contributors to Donald Trump. Did he go too far? Stay tuned. We are having a lively discussion here on the Roundtable, even during the commercials. Ed, you contacted me this week and said, hey, let's talk about the fact that Representative Joaquin Castro of San Antonio sent out a tweet Monday. He is the campaign manager for his brother Julian, and he included the names of 44 people from San Antonio who have contributed the maximum amount, what is that, $2,700, to President Trump. And he simply listed their names, not their addresses, not their email addresses,
but where they
or
work,
numbers,
and their business.
But they had to put their addresses. Right. And some would say this is just, hey, it's hardball politics. Others, like you, would say this just goes over a line.
Listen, I'm involved in politics here and there, but hardball politics is fine. But you're talking about a representative, a congressman, trying to essentially put his thumb on political thought. And this is dangerous. His response...
Well, he's trying to embarrass these people.
Embarrass these people. Exactly. He's trying to give... His quote was, I want them to think twice before they give to Trump. What does that mean? So he publicizes it, and really what he wants is some sort of visceral reaction from those on the left to go and seek these people out, boycott their businesses, and basically chill their right for political speech. That's just flat out wrong. I can't believe sitting here, we're talking about two media guys here, and you want to quelch the First Amendment? You want to quelch political talk?
No,
really? Come on.
No,
But
and Mark
speech is only
Mark
speech,
doesn't
though,
either.
if it's heard, right? So if your donation is
heard.
speech, your donation is speech. It has to be heard. It can be heard both by the resources you give a campaign, but it can also be heard when someone says, hey, did you give money to that guy? Oh, good, now I know. Maybe I don't want to give you the money that you used to give to them.
I think to split the difference here is that just because you can do something, maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, we in the news media frequently print stories about Federal Election Commission contribution data and say, such and such gave to X and Y. But we do that to inform the public so that they know, oh, candidate X has support in the healthcare community.
Right.
Candidate Y has it in the building community. What we don't do is put it out there right after a mass shooting in mass when there's a lot of nervous people. Now, I, as someone who uses FEC data, the last thing I want is Congress to overreact to this and shut it down.
Election Commission.
Fortunately, we have a do-nothing Congress, so that probably won't happen.
Yeah.
But it's one of these things where the medium is the message. And he put this out on Twitter, and it went quickly, and the intent matters, and the sender matters. And in this case, it was the candidate.
All right, before we run out of time, we must mention Steve Ross, the president of the related companies. Kenny Stills, star wide receiver on the Dolphins. Steven sends out this tweet this week, which wasn't severely critical. Let's put the tweet up on the screen. So there's Stephen Ross. Anyway, here's what Stills said. I barely can read that. I'm sorry. Anyway, what it said was, does Stephen Ross's Rise Foundation really align with holding a big fundraiser up to $250,000 for President Trump? And this really is blown up.
It's a legitimate question that he asked. What he asked was, can your foundation stand for equality and you raise $250,000 or millions of dollars in this case for a president who has been antagonistic, to say the least, to the idea of equality and fairness amongst people?
That's flat out. What you just said, the last part of it is flat out.
That the president hasn't been antagonistic?
Untrue. But look, I will say this. Let the receiver, I would support, in fact, I would stand in front of everybody who criticizes the wide receiver Stills from having his opinion and voicing his opinion. That's how strongly I feel about the Constitution. However, he's flat out wrong. And so let's understand, Steve Ross has an opportunity to participate in the political process. Yeah. It's his right as well. And so he does. And it's not because that, you want to take the narrative down as to what he tried to put in there. Look, President Trump has done the following. He's increased employment in the black community, increased employment in the Hispanic community, increased employment with women. He's passed justice. He's passed the justice bill that deals with some of that stuff. Come on now, let's talk about facts.
I want to jump in.
Not opinions.
Those are alternate facts.
And simply
those things didn't happen.
Stephen Ross has a very good record on racial equality and in sports and beyond. And a lot of people think he is a good guy, but whether he should have held this
I would like to know what Stephen Ross's reaction was to the fundraiser that he apparently held, where, according to the New York Post, the president mimicked Asian people's accents.
He did?
Yeah, that's according to the New York Post. For some reason, it wasn't the headline, but I'd like to know if that really happened.
We'll try to get Mr. Ross on. Gentlemen, thank you. Great speaking.